Okay, so welcome to the session, which will deep dive into the feasibility, applicability of DPI in Africa. The session is entitled Towards an African DPI Blueprint, Accelerating Africa Digital Transformation. May I call, please, on all distinguished speakers to join us at the podium, please. Speakers, please join us. And for the others, may I kindly ask you to take your seats, please. So let us maybe start our session. Any adoption process never is about cut and paste. We have seen this everywhere. While I think many, if not most, of the African countries now understood the potential and the need for DPI approach, the objective of this session is really to try to understand a little bit more in details what the adoption process entails really. What are the specificities, context, priorities, needs, challenges that are very specific to the African context really will influence the way countries can and should adopt DPI based on realities on the ground. It is not about inventing a new DPI. It's just about taking the right measures in terms of where to start, how to invest, how to govern, etc. So we are very pleased to have a very distinguished panel of speakers today from many organizations, global and regional, that are very much engaged within the Africa region, plus also we have country representatives. So we're gonna hear from them about different perspectives and perceptions about how do they think this Africa blueprint can look like or should look like. So without further ado, I would like maybe to start with Mr. Walid Kamaluddin, who is the head of the Information Society Division at the African Union Commission. I'm sure that you probably know that the African Union published the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa. And in this strategy, there has been a lot of indications about the Africa context, priorities, challenges, aspirations. So we'd like to hear from Walid how this is seen from the African Union perspective. What is different about Africa that needs maybe to take into consideration when adopting DPI? Walid, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hani, and very good morning, distinguished participants and distinguished attendees. At the African Union, we have provided our member states with the African Digital Transformation Strategy 2023, which is really kind of like continental level digital transformation strategy that promote harnessing digital technologies capabilities when it comes to drive inclusive socio-economic development. So the African Digital Transformation Strategy is focusing on a number of areas. The first one is to promote digital inclusive, no one left behind, everyone is going to be with us in this journey across our 55 member states. Developing digital infrastructure, which is very crucial for anything to be developed, shifting from or kind of like across or along the journey of transformation. And also, definitely, promoting e-governance, promoting digital public goods, and also the public services. So there is a lot of challenges when we talk about the African context, but I always like to see that across the road of these challenges, there is a big number of opportunities that we just have to connect and bridge this to see the opportunities that while we are going to transfer digitally, what's the opportunities that are going to be realized. And for this, there is a lot can be done with global and African standards from the beginning, because some of the African region, they are advanced. Other regions, they are starting their journey. So that's a big opportunity to start things aligned to all this global standard, African standard, and it's very special because we don't have to start from scratch. I think the speakers before our panel spoke about learning from other nations and how this can be a very good shortcut for you to start and also accelerate achieving global goals, African goals, and African Agenda 2063 and the African digital transformation aspiration in a very short time, because it's going to be very good to cut a lot of cost by having, for example, DPIs that can be used to reshare resources, reshare the data among different government and also private sector players.
Thank you very much, Walid, and I think thank you also for highlighting the opportunities that many African countries can have, not to start from scratch, but really to have an early adoption of good practices based on different learnings and based also on the frameworks that exist today. Let me maybe move now to the Office of Special Advisor on Africa, Mr. Tala Kebe. Tala, I know that OZA is also very interested in the concept of digital single market. I think there is an opportunity for DPI to enable this African digital single market, particularly on high priority sectors like health, education, etc. So we would like to hear a little bit from you about what could be done, and particularly what is the role of domestic resource mobilization and international cooperation in supporting countries to adopt DPI to address those kind of needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Good morning. I would just like to start by giving a little bit of context of what our office does. We are an office specialized in basically advising the Secretary General on any matters, Secretary General of the United Nations, on any matters related to Africa. So basically what we do is to help coordinate, to build the coherence of the United Nations intervention on the continent. So now we have 6 investment pathways that we are focusing on to encompass actually what the UN does in general with development partners. So those 6 investment pathways include energy, climate, education, social protection, digital transformation, and jobs. So the reason why we think DPI is very important is that it can be used as a connector to a variety of activities that development partners and countries themselves taking the lead are undertaking in order to make sure that we have an inclusive development at the country level, but also on the continent. So now, why are we talking about digital DPI in the context of digital single market, which is your question? So we want to make sure that DPI is not considered just as a stack of, or a set of tools, wires and networks and what have you, but to make sure that it is something that will support particularly the African Union framework, the continental frameworks of the African Union, including ACFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, and the digital single market, to make sure that we have interoperable systems between the countries so that we have a seamless integration, a seamlessly coupled integration, I would say, when it comes to transfer of data, for instance, data across borders, I would say, in the context of digital single market, interoperability of payment systems, digital ID, etc. Because that's what we want to do. We want to consider Africa as a whole and not take the countries individually, because we believe that through regional integration, we're going to have the sort of optimal level of economy or development on the continent that we need. And we believe that DPI is going to come handy. So maybe later on I can talk about how DPI comes into play when it comes to financing development on the continent. I can talk about it now, but basically, if you look at countries like the Sahel, I'm from Senegal, and we're in the Sahel, and there are countries like Mali, etc., where we have a lot of issues with the jihadists, etc. And our study basically underscores the lack of state in most of those countries. Those countries are big, and government or the state cannot expand enough to cover all the countries, just in terms of geographical coverage, but also in terms of governance and other issues that are very important to development. So we believe that deploying an African DPI stack blueprint that take into consideration the specificities of those countries, but also those continental framework and strategy of the African Union could help actually expand the presence of the state. And that's what we believe when it comes to the interoperability of system between the countries, where we're going to have enough connection between the countries to making sure that they could support each other. And we believe that through that regional integration, we can fend off some of the security issues that we find that these countries face. The last issue, last issue opportunity that I would like to mention is actually when it comes to financing for development. We want to consider DPI as an entry point really for governance and making sure, for instance, when it comes to financing Africa's development, we leverage domestic resource mobilization. We want to shy away or stay away from ODA or official development assistance, because we know that aid has not helped Africa to develop. We believe that domestic resource mobilization is the way to go. So now, why are we talking about DPI? If we develop the infrastructure, and all the components that everybody knows that are connected to DPI, or when we deploy DPI, we have them, digital ID, etc., consent, and you name it, we will be able to control our financial flows. Today we have companies, organizations, worldwide, African or investors on the continent with a significant issue when it comes to illicit financial flows. We don't have that control. And implementing the right tools, the right strategy will help us, or will help African countries actually to have the control of the narrative of development, but by doing so, to be able also to look at what is it that we need to do to make sure that the proper governance is in place. So that's what I can say now to answer to your question, Annie. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tala, and thanks also for highlighting one of the few specificities actually in the Africa region, which is in some cases the maybe not full, complete presence of the states, and how digital can potentially fill this gap. And there has been some studies I know done by OSA that digitizing government services can also have a potential impact on reducing conflict, because when the citizens have access to government services, it creates some sort of credibility to the governments, and it creates some sort of satisfaction, so which can also bridge the gaps of inequalities, etc. So can have huge impact in terms of improving, peace and keeping peace building. Also, I think you have highlighted this issue also of the needs to maybe start to balance the need for ODA with domestic resources, and to give more countries control over their not only presence, but also digital future. Let us maybe move and we are very glad and honored to have Mr. Amandeep Gill, the Under Secretary General, Office of the UN Secretary General Envoy on Technology. Mr. Gill, I know that last week was very extremely busy week during UNGA. There has been a lot of key initiatives, key events. I can mention the launch of the DPI safeguards that are really meant to build trust and enhance safety when building DPIs. We have also seen the approval of the Global Digital Compact, which also highlights the fundamental of safeguards in promoting sustainable and equitable digital cooperation. So we'd like to kindly hear from you. How do you see those kinds of frameworks and tools and resources can really help countries accelerate the adoption of DPI on the global scale, but also particularly in the Africa region? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hani, and pleasure to be speaking on this topic with this distinguished panel. I think last week, the most strategic outcome was the adoption of the Global Digital Compact. And within the Global Digital Compact, there is a kind of centering of the issue of building an inclusive digital economy. So the 5 areas, connectivity and accelerating progress on the SDGs, then trust and safety, protection, human rights online, data and AI, and then you have in the middle the digital economy. And even the process of consultations on the Global Digital Compact, where we did a lot of regional outreach, the consultation in Africa kind of centered the thinking in a sense. If you look at even the rest of the global south, some parts, a lot of optimism, other parts, a lot of pessimism. But in Africa, there was this balance in terms of excitement, but cautious excitement about the future. We need to get it right. And I think that's where the GDC outcome kind of aligns with the African aspirations and centering of issues. And that's where what the African Union did with the African Digital Compact kind of, in a policy sense also aligns very nicely with the GDC. Now, coming to the DPI issue, I think what we have in the GDC is a recognition that DPIs are contextual, that there's no single model that fits every situation, and different contexts will have to take this forward based on their own needs and their own resources and capabilities. I think this is where yesterday when Nandan spoke about, you cannot outsource thinking. I think that's the point, that every region has to discover this for itself. And for Africa, the key drivers are the following in terms of, developing its own approach. And we are very proud to work with our colleagues from the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, with ITU, and with the African Union to take this forward. So what are the main drivers before we get into concrete actions? One is connectivity, so still 36% connectivity, so it's very low. The second is interoperability. Interoperability is still quite weak. Then you have a fragmented market with very weak intra-regional trade. It's about, I did an op-ed with the section of the leading on the Continental Free Trade Union. So there you see that in intra-region trade is only 14%, compared with 75% with the European Union. So I think that's something to be appreciated in terms of the context. And then there is the question of domestic resources, which was referred to, but resources also in the sense of capabilities, talents, private sector capabilities, etc. So we put all these together. I think it's important to have an Africa first approach. Yes, there are good lessons. The India example, the Estonia example, there are many other good examples of how to build societal scale, digital transformation. But we need to have an African approach. And I think this brings me to the last part of my intervention. I think this is where we need to find what's the kind of unique driver that works not only now, but in the longer run. And I think this is where this gathering is so important, understanding, listening. I think this is the first order of business. We should get that right. Is that the fragmented market and weak regional, intra-regional trade? Is it existing interoperability challenges and the ways they are being handled? You look at the East African community, for example, how M-Pesa evolved from a way to just send money people to a business facilitation tool. So now you have companies in Tanzania settling invoices in Kenya. You have the UN system. We in the UN are using this to help 4 million people affected by drought in Africa. So what is it that's the key driver, and how do we build the African thinking around DPIs so that at the leaders level, the right direction can come down in terms of the actions? So looking forward to taking this very important issue forward in collaboration with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gill, and I think you highlighted a very important point, is really this issue of appropriation and ownership of DPI, and I really liked, again, and I agree with you about this, you cannot outsource thinking, and there is an opportunity to get it right from the outset. So DPI is a concept, is an approach, is a way to invest, is a way to build services, but you need to be able to own and not to lend your sovereignty to outsiders, particularly that the issue of sovereignty is something that is very close to heart of many African countries. Thank you also for highlighting the need for unique drivers. What are the drivers for DPI adoption? I think you mentioned fragmented market, intra-regional trade. Previously, we mentioned the lack of state presence in many countries, or the weak state in many countries. So those are all the kind of drivers that can really make sure that the DPI is fit for purpose and fit for Africa. Let me move now to the UN Economic Commission for Africa. We are very glad to have Mr. Maktar Sek, who is the Chief of Technology and Innovation Section at UNECA. UNECA is always very active since long time in uncovering actionable strategies for driving inclusive and sustainable digital transformation. We'd like to hear maybe from you, Mr. Sek, on what do you think are the good approaches for, and also common pitfalls in DPI development and adoption, and what is the UNECA aspiration for the coming years? How do you see the future in terms of deepening collaboration, both regionally and globally, and how we can scale existing initiatives and also pioneering new initiatives? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. I think it is very important to have this discussion on what is the African approach on DPI. We have to define our approach based on our needs. What are now the key priority in Africa? Among others, we have digital transformation. We have gender equity and financial inclusion. And how now DPI can be fit to this challenge to become an opportunity for Africa, given our young generation population and also this young generation. But we are facing several challenges in the continent. Mr. Haman did highlight some connectivity, infrastructure development. We have the issue of cyber security. We have the issue of funding. The issue of regulatory is very important because we don't have a sound regulation for this DPI across the continent. The issue also, we have also several social impact in the continent for DPI. And why at UNECA we develop this African approach based on our needs and the challenge we are facing. First, on the policy side, we work closely with African Union and as a partner, the representative of AUC already highlighted this Africa's Union Digital Transformation Strategy to 2020-2030. I think a lot of partners here contribute to this, the development of this AU strategy like ITU, World Bank, and Smart Africa, and others. Also, we developed last year this Africa Digital Single Market, also the Digital ID Blueprint, all this to make this digital public infrastructure accessible and also contribute to the economic development. But sometimes we forget if you do this DPI without growing this innovation, because we need to grow innovation in the continent, and DPI can help to grow this innovation, but it should be more inclusive, and people can use this DPI to develop a lot of service. And one also activity, it is on capacity building. I talked about at the beginning on our youth generation. And we need to promote our youth generation to build their capacity, because around 2050, 42% of the world population, or youth population, will be in Africa. And why at ECA, we already developed an African Research Center on Artificial Intelligence in Brazzaville, Congo-Brazzaville, or to develop open source application based on AI, also to develop AI platform based on also on this open source. Also on cybersecurity, we need to build the capacity of the continent, because this cybersecurity costs 10% of the Africa GDP, and we are working with Togo to build this regional center. As well as for the youth generation, we are working with Rwanda to develop this team center. We welcome also the adoption of the Global Digital Compact. We work a lot with African Union and with the Office of Tech Envoy to make sure African priority will be reflected in this declaration. Also, at the technical level, we work with several partners like ITU, because sometimes we focus more on the interoperability, forgetting about the API, because it is an API where we can get a lot of revenue and a lot of people can develop application, and where we can promote also innovation. Funding, it is a big problem in Africa, how to fund this initiative, because it is where also we work with several partners to fund the application, the startup, to find a way to fund this digital infrastructure across the continent. It is one of key of our area. And also this collaboration, I think, is very important with all organizations working on the digital era, and why I think we have this session today. And we work closely with our different partners to see how we can develop this Africa DPI stack. At the end, I think it is very important for all African countries to collaborate, to have a common approach of this DPI. We are going to implement this African free trade area to develop this cross-border trade, and DPI will play an important role. We have to work together to develop a common standard for Africa, why collaboration is a key. And also we need to develop the capacity building in the digital era for our youth generation, and also to look at how we can have a common standard at the continental level. It is some element I would like to highlight from the ECA work, and we welcome also to collaborate with all our partners here and others to see how we can have a mechanism of funding for this DPI infrastructure. But we need an African approach like India. We can have several approaches, but let us focus on African approach, because the problems are not the same and the objectives are not the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for re-highlighting the need for an African approach for DPI. Thanks also for highlighting the need for capacity building, because I think it all depends on the knowledge. DPI is, I would say, it's a knowledge-heavy approach. There are a lot to know and to understand before you embark in building the DPIs, because this will also entails heavy investments, multi-millions types of investments. So you really need to be able to really master the development and maintenance and governing of this DPI. Let's now move to hear from countries, from African countries, about how they see their own experience in building this digital infrastructure. By the way, I would like to highlight that while DPI might seem like a new term, but the initiative, there has been already a lot of initiatives happening that are DPI without necessarily calling them DPI. So we'd like to hear maybe first from Egypt, our host country. So we're very glad to have Mrs. Suzanne Al-Aqabawi, the ICT Minister Advisor on data governance. We all understand how critical is data governance is. Actually, DPI is really about data at the end of the day, is to make sure that data can flow within the government. For data to flow within the government, you need to enable trust and interoperability. And this is basically one of the key objectives of having a DPI, to enable this kind of exchange in a trusted manner and in an interoperable manner, which can unlock a lot of opportunities for digital transformation. So data governance really is at the heart of DPI. So we'd like to hear from Mrs. Lakabawi about Egypt's approach and experience in data governance and DPI in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you, Hani, for this panel, and I'm delighted to take part with the esteemed members of the panel in discussing this matter. Let me give you an overview about where Egypt stands with respect to governance. Is that better?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
With respect to governance, we believe that an important element towards DPI blueprint is the governance element. And Egypt worked on having a legislative context and to allow the ecosystem to flourish in this case. We have issued a certain number of laws to help instate the digital transformation and help the DPI process. We started with the cybercrime law back in 2018, and then the personal data protection law. We have a national AI strategy. Recently, we have the cloud first policy that was issued a couple of months back. We are starting very soon, we will be launching our personal data protection authority. That is going to be the regulatory authority to govern and oversee the implementation of the personal data protection law. This authority is about to instate a new culture for data governance in Egypt, whereby we are very much aware of the dual nature of data being a human right, that personal data specifically, a human right that requires protection, and at the same time having an economic value. So we're trying to strike the balance between the two. Cross-border transfer of data is a key importance. Setting up a solid regulatory foundation that allows the free flow of data through giving those who deal with the personal data methodologies for the classification of their data to identify which data needs to be localized and which ones could be transferred with safety contractual mechanisms. So generally speaking, we are in line with the overall African context because we work very closely with African partners. I think we are all together. Recently, we've all set up our own regulatory authorities for data protection. Recently, the AU has issued a self-assessment tool to identify the level of readiness with respect to data governance. And we have been working with them on this front as well. So this is in short where we stand. We are very much aware of the importance of the governance of data. There remains some challenges, mainly related to eventually the enforcement of these laws, and especially whenever cross-border transfer of data is at stake. And I believe that we will need to have a lot of agreements between the different regulatory authorities to facilitate the enforcement of those laws and to secure a free flow of data. And I concur to my esteemed panel members that we do have an important issue related to capacity building and the resources needed in terms of professionals who are able to instate and to assist in setting up these authorities. So thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Al-Akabawi. Actually, I would like to share a personal lessons learned, and I'm glad that Ivar Talu is here, because I remember from Estonia, you said that the first thing that Estonia did to start the digital transformation was not to build systems, was to create a data law. Which seems very strange, right? Because you usually jump and develop things. But without having a data law, the whole system will not function as according to the DPI. Because if you don't have enforcement for governments and to provide the right regulatory frameworks for government to have the trust to share data, establish government registries, and even the register of registries, protect privacy, etc. Those are things that you need to start with. So it's extremely important that data governance is not something that you would deal afterthought. This is a prerequisite for DPI. And also for cloud, I'm glad that you mentioned cloud-first policy, because this is something that we noticed in many African countries. There is a huge lack of skills around cloud management and cloud infrastructure. In many countries, there is not yet cloud skills, not even cloud infrastructure. So again, it's a prerequisite, because if you start to develop services using the DPI approach, those needs to be deployed immediately in a cloud-safe environment. So those are extremely important issues that needs to be tackled immediately. And I agree with you, there is a huge lack of skills. And this is one of the things that we at the GovStack and ITU are very kind of focused. Really start with some of those prerequisites, because, you know, when you talk about DPI and you start the journey, then you immediately discover that you cannot even deploy your first services. So that's, I think, it's an extremely important lessons learned. Now let's move to Lesotho. We are very glad to have Mr. Kanono Ramashamole, who is the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Information, Communication, Science and Technology and Innovation, Kingdom of Lesotho. We are working with Lesotho since a while, and we know that Lesotho has already embarked on the digital transformation. So we'd really like to hear from you about what are your aspirations, where are you in the journey, and what kind of challenges you are facing, and how you plan to overcome them. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, we missed Mr. Kanono. I saw him yesterday, so no, he's not in the room. Okay. Okay, so maybe when he comes, maybe he can join us, because he's present, I saw. Okay, so let me maybe move to South Africa. South Africa is a very important country this next year because of the G20. South Africa will be the G20, will assume the G20 presidency. And I know that DPI is already in the next year agenda for the G20. So we are very glad to have Mr. Alfred Moto, who is the Acting Deputy Director General, Policy and Development and Strategy, Department of Communication and Digital Technologies in South Africa. Again, same question for you, similar to Lesotho, because we know that South Africa has started already its digital transformation journey a while ago. So where you are in the journey, where do you think the next steps are, and what are the key challenges, and how do you perceive overcoming them? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity
Can you
to
be
share.
closer to the mic, maybe? Closer to the mic.
Closer. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to enable us to share our experiences that we believe others can learn from, but we also very open to learning because obviously different countries have got strengths in different areas. But from us, obviously, yeah, we hosting the G20 next year, and we're hoping that it will have an impactful legacy in terms of service delivery to our citizens. The South African context, as a start to drive in digital transformation, obviously we had made sure that we have appropriate legislation in terms of connectivity, because it is critical to you can't talk about digitization or digital transformation in the absence of connectivity. So we made sure that we have policies that are designed to drive connectivity. We have what we call SA Connect, South Africa Connect, which is basically our broadband policy. This is designed to ensure that there is connectivity across the country, but specifically emphasizing or focusing on the rural areas and underserved areas. In South Africa, there are huge geographical disparities where you find that you got the elite. I'm sure people who would have been in Cape Town and Johannesburg would know. You have a group that is the elite. You got the ones middle class, and then you got the poor, who cannot afford most of the services. They don't have infrastructure. So the intention with this policy was to ensure that every South African is connected, but focusing on the disadvantaged who would not ordinarily afford means to procure, for instance, your fiber, your mobile devices designed to ensure that you have access to digital services. On top of that, obviously, we have also established a regulatory regime that is designed to support our data management, specifically in terms of data protection. We got the Protection of Personal Information Act that is basically designed to ensure that there is data privacy protections, but it also establishes a regime for cross-border data flows. Obviously, the challenge with the protection of information legislation is that we do not as yet have the right capacity to ensure enforcement across the board or to create awareness. We also have what we call the Cyber Crimes Act, which begin to give effect to the prosecution of online violations and data violations. So again, this is where we ensure that there is no online abuses, the issues of cyber crimes also. It gives effect to prosecutions and investigations in that regard. Recently, we promulgated the data and cloud policy, which is specifically designed to ensure that South Africans are able to leverage data for socio-economic development. This focuses on ensuring that data is available, everyone can access it, but most importantly, again, is about having a supportive digital infrastructure in the context of data centers and cloud. We're trying to encourage investment in those areas. So this policy is talking to investors out there to say South Africa is a ripe environment for investment in data centers. And so far, we have had a positive response from the sector. I'm saying there's also the issue of access. We planning in the short term to develop an open data strategy that is designed to ensure that data is available. There is data sharing between government and government departments, as well as government and industry and other non-government stakeholders. Obviously, we're also looking at creating a digital trust and strengthening a digital trust environment, because we already have policies and legislation. It's more about creating awareness and capacitating our regulators to enforce that. Obviously, the issue of skills cuts across the board. Every country, the critical part is skills. And you know, in the ICT environment, the issue of skills can be a bit tricky because they have to be adaptable. Today, you train people to do this. In a few years' time, the skills that are there are no longer relevant. So that part is also what we're trying to focus on creating. We have developed a strategy that allows that adaptability of skills development. And then one last important part relates to obviously the issues. I think there was talk about data, cross-border flows, and data sovereignty. We believe in obviously an enabling environment for cross-border data flows across the board. Even our legislation supports that. Obviously, it has to be conditional to applicable legislation. Secondly, it has to be purpose-based, especially from a government perspective, where we can be able to identify other international partners to enter into, for instance, data sharing and interoperability arrangements. So we would be looking at countries that have got harmonized legislation similar to ours. So if you have similar data protection policies and legislation, we can be able to enter into data sharing agreement based on specific purposes, maybe health or education and so forth. So we have created that enabling policy environment for that data sharing. So generally, our challenges obviously relate to, I think you know about the power supply issues. We are solving them. We are gradually moving to obviously introducing different sources of energy. So it is helping us to address such problems. Obviously, the issue of skills is another. Connectivity is still, like I was saying, it is disparate. It is strong in certain areas, it's weaker in other areas. But for government, I think the biggest challenge relates to interoperability, because most of our services are online. It's more of making sure that they are interoperable to be able to provide integrated service delivery to our citizens. Because once you have a single view of a citizen, you are already able to identify specific support mechanisms that can be granted to the citizen. But I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. I mean, you've made almost a good summary of the type of issues that is typically faced by a country. And thanks for highlighting, because if you think about it, building a DPI is a combination of a lot of different areas of specializations and skills. We mentioned cloud, interoperability, architecture, cybersecurity, software development, DevOps. It's a lot of different skills, and those skills are not necessarily available. And also, as you mentioned, you need to upgrade them as we move forward. So that's why I think I think you have highlighted this kind of significant focus about skills, and maybe this is something that us as international organizations, maybe this is something that we should focus on, and potentially we can contribute to kind of do this kind of knowledge bridge that is extremely required. But also thanks for highlighting the other infrastructure issues that we always not forget, but they are extremely important, from the power supply to connectivity to data centers, etc. Okay, let me now move to the last but not least. At ITU, we have the pleasure to have Mr. Emmanuel Manessa, who is the Acting Regional Director for Africa. Emmanuel, let me ask you, as a colleague, I permit myself to ask you, from all what you heard so far, can you give some sort of an overview of some consideration that you think are important for countries to consider when they are about to embark or to continue their DPI journey? And maybe let me ask all the panel to prepare themselves. As a closing remark, I would like each panelist to say one consideration. Complete the following sentence. If you are going to give a recommendation or an advice or share insights with a country, you would say, while you are embarking or continuing your DPI journey, you should consider, and then you should continue the statement. So think about it, because this is, I would like each panelist to contribute their final thoughts about those kind of consideration. But let's maybe hear first from Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you very much, and really appreciate this privilege to talk about the Africa Blueprint. And ITU, the UN Specialized Agency for ICT and Digitals. So what we do, and our core objective, is universal connectivity and digital transformation. And for Africa, we have the Africa Regional Initiatives, which is universal access to communication and digital transformation, affordable, secure ICTs, mobilization of resources and partnership, as well as enabling policy and regulatory framework. When it comes to Africa Digital Transformation Strategy 2020-2030, which has set the foundation for all DPIs we're talking about, it also highlights digital infrastructure and access, digital skills, application and platforms, digital identifications, enabling policy and regulatory framework, as well as strong political will and support. So it's quite obvious that different African countries are at different stage of their digital journey. So what DPI brings, or the blueprints we're proposing, if I could summarize, we need a DPI brewed in African port. Why do we need African port? Because the foundation is there. What we want is scalable solution, interoperable solutions. Instead of implementing across verticals, we want to implement in horizontal layers. What does it mean in horizontal layers? You create a system that could be easily scalable. You collect data once, use multiple times. As services comes, you can still accommodate. You had it been said that AI will turbocharge DPI. How could that happen? It means if you implement horizontal layer, you can easily accommodate AI features that could turbocharge DPI services without redesigning the whole system. So the whole concept here, where we are coming with the DPI blueprint for Africa, recognizing that different African countries are at different level of implementing their DPI strategy, we need African countries to streamline their efforts toward digital under the foundation or the context of Africa Digital Transformation and other initiatives. And we work with all UN agencies together with AU and other regional groups to ensure that Africa could develop something that is fit for purpose, fit for future, and fit for the present. So key enabling issues are, first, interoperability, which we talked about it. Everybody's talking about interoperability. But open source, why do we go for open source? Because innovation is not for a few. So going to open source, it opens pathways, it gives the opportunity to each country to be able to develop and innovate and still be able to maintain their systems. So the open DPI blueprint, the Africa DPI blueprint, which is also, if you read through it, is likely the replica of GovStack, which ITU, the government of Estonia, and GSA is doing. You can see that is a continuation and a guidance that is going to lead countries to avoid fragmentation, implement once and use, use many times, but also being able to scale as needs and services arises. But also, the core objective is to have inclusive, safe, secure, sustainable, and interoperable digitals for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. We've been asked to kind of conclude, so we have 1 minute. So one last word per speaker. Just give your top insight for countries to consider. Let's start from Mr. Gil.
One word, the DPI safeguards framework. Please take that into consideration so that you have safe, inclusive, sustainable, trustworthy DPI systems, not only now, but into the future.
Excellent. So DPI safeguards.
I will say connectivity gaps, cyber risks, sustainability, and cost of access, because we are serving our African citizens, so that's very important.
Excellent. Cost of access as well.
Yeah, taking a cue from what you mentioned, I would say, while embarking on a DPI journey, you should consider regional, continental, and global leverages that are necessary to enable a collaborative and inclusive digital economy.
Excellent. Collaboration. Egypt.
Educating all stakeholders about the value of data.
Capacity building and awareness and data. Learning about data. Oza.
Cooperation, cooperation, integration, and we need to add the dimension of economy and the political aspect that drives the geopolitical context, which is quite significant on the continent.
Excellent. Thank you. Uneka?
Yes, collaboration, because we need to collaborate to put in place an African DPI approach to promote innovation and welfare in the continent. Thank you.
Excellent. I think you already covered. Thank you very much. And I think our speakers really deserve a good round of applause. Thank you.